Yet another artist in residence who has created the I'll Be Seeing You for the COVID era. Um,
That's a good way to put it.
Thank you. Joseph and David Zellnik are brand new songwriters on the musical theater scene, unless you saw the show Yank, which was one of the most prolific shows I think I've ever seen. Today, we're with Joseph Zellnik. Joseph, how did you get involved in the project?
The project Artist in Residence you're talking
Artist in Residence, yes.
about. Artist in Residence, well, actually, it is my husband, Andrew Gerlach, who came up with the idea of doing this album just as soon as lockdown started. He's somebody who really loves to have projects. And as soon as lockdown started, he was trying to think of a way to help all the people who were suddenly out of work when Broadway shut down and the whole theater scene shut down. And of course, now it's obviously far beyond Broadway. It's all sorts of arts organizations shut down. So he came up with the idea, since everybody was at home, and there are so many ways of recording things at home now, that perhaps he could get some Broadway writers and theater writers in New York to write original material about what we were all going through and create a fundraising album. So that was the beginning of it. And of course, he turned to me over the breakfast table and said, "Do you want to write a song?" Which of course I said yes. So.
Now you write with your brother David, correct?
I do write with my brother David. So I sort of lucked into having a built-in collaborator. My parents were very thoughtful that way.
Who does the music? Who does the lyric?
I do the music. And originally, when I first started writing, when I was 12 or 13, I wrote my first songs. And I found that writing lyrics was much, much harder than writing music. And it's just such persnickety work. And so I sort of trained, I mean, my brother loved musical theater too, but I sort of coached him in how to write lyrics. And now he very quickly surpassed me and wrote better lyrics than I ever could have hoped for. So we've written together ever since.
Well, I have a question. Since I did not know that you and Andrew were married.
Yes.
Congratulations, by the way. Have you two ever written anything together?
Well, because both of us, I mean, he writes music and words, but he has collaborated with a number of other lyricists. He's never written lyrics for somebody else's music unless there's something I don't know about before I met him. But he has set other people's words. So he's primarily a composer, but then a composer who also writes books and plays and lyrics. So there's really not need for two composers. Two composers trying to write a song together is a very odd prospect. We have collaborated on a screenplay and a treatment for a TV show, and we are currently, we have a book proposal out of sort of a quasi-musical theater history based on a poster that Andrew designed called The Periodic Table of Broadway Musicals. And so we're working on a book proposal out for that, which we would co-write. But as far as music goes, I don't think you'll ever see both of our names on one song.
I always thought it would be interesting if two composers got together. What would that collaboration be?
Well, one of the interesting things that's happened in the last 15 years or so is occasionally you see two composers working on one show.
Right.
Where they want two different musical voices for, let's say, two different groups of characters, or just for whatever reason, and multiple composers working on one show. But I can't imagine how that would work, trying to work on one song with another composer, even one you're married to.
Where did you come up with the idea for your song?
Well, this was actually my brother and I, our original discussion about it. We thought we would try to write a comic song because we thought, what do people need during times like this? Everybody needs a good laugh. But it's very difficult, even under the best of circumstances, to come up with a truly funny idea that can work in a song, because often we found music can rob funny words of their humor, because often singing something makes it feel very sincere. And so we tried a few different comedy ideas and none of them were taking. And then we thought we might play to, our strengths. As you mentioned, we wrote a musical called Yank, which was set during the 1940s and pays homage to that sort of golden age of American song, and especially the sort of warmth and lyricism of musical theater that at the time we started writing Yank was sort of in short supply. And So we thought, why not try to write a song like you said, and I'll be seeing you for the lockdown era, something that was like sticking, we like to say, sticking your toe into a warm bath, just music that sort of envelops you, sort of a lovely lush sound and a sentimental thought, but tinged with melancholy too. So we thought we would aim to try to write a 1940s standard type thing, but brought up to the modern era with modern references and with a little bit more adventurous musical choices in a few cases.
Did you always have Santino in mind for this when you were writing it?
As soon as we came up with the idea to try to write a sort of standard, I did immediately think of Santino. Santino had worked on a workshop of ours, so we did know him, and I think he has one of the prettiest voices uh, in the New York theater. And so I thought that would just be the most amazing thing if we could get him to say yes, and he said yes right away. So we were very, very excited to have him, and it was a fun collaboration working. I mean, I think this was, now people are getting a little more used to working through their computers, cameras, talking over Zoom conversations like we're having right now.
Right.
But in those early weeks, it was sort of a new thing for all of us. So there's a lot of going back and forth, but happily, recording is a medium where you can record a take, you can go back to the actor and ask them to just sing one phrase again, and then
Oh,
punch
really?
that in. You can. So the final version of the song that is on the album is made up of a handful of different takes all spliced together to get that perfect interpretation that we were looking for.
Yeah, I know when we were talking to Andrew, he was telling us that he's become like an expert in this technology now.
Yes,
And
he's
people are
very,
now
very,
calling.
yes, he's very, very good at this sort of thing. So, I'm lucky to have him as a reference. But I also know the technology and was able to the vocal part together. I pieced together the take I liked. Andrew then put a shine on it. We'll say he was able to add. He's much more expert in adding a little reverb, pitch tuning, things like that. And so he was able to fine tune the final product.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it was
Um,
a really fun experience.
I know that Laura Osnes loves you guys. She actually
Oh,
touted your praises when we interviewed her.
oh, that's lovely to hear. I haven't seen her interview yet. Has that been posted?
Yes, it's up.
Okay, well, I'll go check that out now. Of course.
Hers is up as well as Stephen
Her
Aaron
song is
Ferretti.
beautiful, and she does such a great job. And she's ending up fighting they had an enormous orchestra. We thought we would have the biggest orchestra on the album, and it turns out that we were not even close. They had the equivalent of like a 45-piece orchestra on their track. So, but
I
anyway.
guess that helps when you've done the show Bandstand.
Yes, it does. Well, I mean, she was wonderful in band. So she's just a lovely singer. We've never worked with her, but she's someone on my list that I would love to work with at some point.
What other singers would you like to work with?
Oh, well, when we were talking about if Santino did not, was not available, or for whatever reason didn't want to sing the song, we actually thought we might have a woman sing it. And we had been talking about Laura Benanti, who we also just love. And we did work with Laura Benanti, but at least 20 years ago on something. And but she's always been in one of my favorite voices on Broadway. So I'd have to put her up there.
What are you working on now?
Well, my brother and I, shortly before lockdown started, we had finished a draft of a show that we're currently sending out and trying to interest people in. But it's a complicated one, and I'd rather not go into it. But we're starting a new one, which involves the early 1930s and Hollywood, and the coming in of the production code, which was sort of self-censorship of the movies. And there's a lot of interesting elements to that, and we're just starting the process. So I hesitate to say anything firmly about what will be in the show or won't be in the show, but it will concern most especially how the Hollywood censorship of the 1930s changed the depiction of women on film, and how it circumscribed how women could be depicted. It's with the production code that you start having rules like any woman who commits an immoral act has to end the film by being punished. She can't end up with a happy ending. It's, you know, it's the reason why it
She was
happens to be
damned from day one.
yeah, from day one, exactly. It's the, you know, the sort of quintessential version is Scarlet in Gone with the Wind. Scarlet lies and cheats and steals other people's beaux, and in the end, she gets left by her husband. I mean, that is taken directly from the book. But in all Hollywood movies of the era, if a woman, you know, strays from her marriage or something, usually her children get taken away and she's punished. And this was actually written into the code that you know, that
Wow.
a woman, you know, the morality of it. It also, there are many other facets to the code that, you know, we're interested in, such as you were no longer allowed to depict homosexuality in any way. You were no longer allowed to show a man and a woman who weren't married, you know, in the same bed.
Well, even if
Or,
you were married, you had to be in twin beds.
exactly, in twin beds, 1 foot on the floor. The kiss could last no longer than 3 seconds, and it's it's a fascinating era, and I think that one of the things that interests me and my brother is the parts of history that get sort of forgotten. That was the impetus behind Yank, which is that there were many gay service, you know, members in World War II who fought in the American military, and at the time it was actually somewhat tacitly accepted. It was not nearly as
Taboo.
yes, taboo as it later became. They didn't clamp down on. They had a war to win. They
Right.
weren't so concerned with, you know, policing the sexuality of the people in the armed forces. I'm oversimplifying by a lot, but you know, in Newsweek, for instance, in 1947, did an article on homosexuals in uniform. So it was something that was a little bit more well known, and then it sort of got swept under the carpet with the 1950s and the clamping down on all sorts
That
of
would have been the McCarthyism.
the McCarthyism, and also just this idea that normalcy was like the #1 goal in the 1950s. And so sort of a lot of the stuff that happened in World War II got forgotten, and that was what we wanted to show in Yank. So I think the same thing is true here. What we would like to show is that some of the things we associate, that the 60s was the big moment of women's liberation, but a lot of the things that happened in the 60s uh, started in the 20s and perhaps would have come to fruition and flowered in the later 1930s and the 1940s, and yet it was sort of clamped down. And so what we think of as old-fashioned, if you go pre what we think of as old-fashioned, you suddenly find much more modern attitudes towards sex. Women are allowed to enjoy sex. You know, women are allowed to test the waters with a number of different men before deciding on the right person to marry, those sorts of things. And some of those pre-code movies, which is what you call movies before the code came in, some of these pre-code movies, you watch them and you think, wow, that is such a modern attitude. And so we like to sort of shine a light on these forgotten parts of history and, you know, upend.
I'm looking forward to seeing this because I'm from California and my family was involved in the Hollywood aspect of it. And the new show Hollywood that was on, I think it was
Yes,
Netflix.
Netflix, yeah.
You're like, what the hell?
Well,
This
yeah,
is-
that
this
was a
is
sort of
nothing.
fantasy version of what we, you know, what we were doing. They were sort of saying, what if it had all happened earlier? What if someone had been brave enough to do an interracial love story in the 1950s?
Yeah, that was never happening. If
Would
you
the
knew
barriers have come down? And that was another part of the production code, was that you could have no interracial
Right.
romances. They touched on this in the show Hollywood, that Anna May Wong had been a big star.
Right.
And then post the production code, they couldn't really put her in any movies because there were no Asian male stars, so there was no one for her to have a romance
Right.
with.
They couldn't put her in the good earth.
Exactly, and it's, I think it's worth remembering sort of that some of this stuff comes from the top down. Sometimes things are imposed on our society without getting super political. I think that we think this story is timely at the moment because I think there's a big attempt by part of this country right now to insist that you know,
Life doesn't happen. Yes.
well,
I agree.
that their view of what morality
Right.
is the only one, and that the rest of us don't exist, and that they want to try to, like, you know, sweep us under the carpet. So this has happened before, and sometimes it has been successful because they managed to hold back women's liberation for decades. They managed to hold back certain civil rights for decades. It's
Oh, don't even get me started on women's rights. We need
oh
count it, one frickin' state to be equal.
yeah.
And
What
we're not.
did you watch Mrs. America on Hulu?
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
And that was, again, that was a fascinating part of history that I'm not ashamed to admit I didn't really know very much about. I remember the ERA not passing. I was a small child, but I didn't know really a lot of the stuff that had happened, the other parts of the story.
I just love the fact that most people don't even know that women don't have rights.
Yeah, it's
If you
scary.
go to North Carolina and you cut your hair and your husband or your father didn't like it, you can be jailed.
Really?
Yes. People don't know this and it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, it's
Um,
appalling.
they say that eyes are the windows to the soul, but
Hmm.
I believe that songs are.
Ah,
If you had to choose a song or a cycle of songs to describe who you are, what would that be?
oh, goodness. A cycle of songs that describes who I am.
In other words, if one song doesn't do it, you can add more songs into it.
Uh, this is the kind of question that I always find difficult because there's so many. I used to say people would ask me things like, what's your favorite song, or what's your favorite color, or what's your favorite musical? And I always say I can have favorites of things that I don't care about, but when it comes to things I really care about, it's impossible to choose because so many different colors and songs and musicals express different parts of me, and at different moments, I feel
Ah,
they represent me, or they feel they you know represent one facet of my personality. I mean,
that's why it's my
fooling
favorite.
myself, but I like to think that they're more complicated than one song.
It's actually my favorite question to ask people because the question will always change. You know, if you're an evolving human being, it will always
Exactly.
change.
I can tell you that before I met Andrew, and before we became a couple and then got married, I probably would have said "If Love Were All" by
Mhm.
Noel Coward, because I had a certain kind of bleak um, view of romance, and my ability to sort of find that part of life, and he completely sort of changed that. When my brother gave a toast at our wedding, he said. Before you met Andrew, you were Loren's Hart, all tart and sort of cynical, and now you're totally Oscar Hammerstein. Now you believe in optimism. Now you're optimistic, and you believe that good things can happen to people if you just wait for the right person to come along. So I agree with you. It changes. It changes all the time. I will tell you that what I am. This will probably come as no surprise. What music I've been playing, what music I've been putting on my piano behind me, and playing through is I've been playing through my music books from the 1930s and 40s and 50s, the golden age of American song. And I think the reason that that's speaking to me at the moment is that craftsmanship was so important back then, and
Absolutely.
and structure. These songs sometimes feel carved in marble to me. It's like you can't, every piece of it has been just carefully thought out to balance the other pieces. And I think that I'm looking for in my life at the moment some sense that rational balance does exist in the universe.
Mhm.
So those songs are speaking to my need for order and beauty. Also, there's beauty and charm, and that's something that, at least for me, I don't tend to find in current pop music. um, Different things are important in pop music now. There was a great shift when rock music became dominant in the 50s, middle of the 50s into the 60s, and I feel as though rhythm started taking supremacy over harmony.
Right.
And it's that well chosen chord, that chord you don't expect, or that inner voice in a melody, in the harmony, that usually breaks my heart. And that's harmony is what interests me the most. So for many reasons, I'm sort of going back into the old, dipping a toe back into the old stuff. In addition, it's also research for the new show that I told you about, grounding myself again in what the 20s and 30s actually sounded like. So
If you could give advice to young songwriters now in this age of we don't know where things are going,
mhm.
what would it be?
I would give the same advice I would give even before this time, which is, and I'm specifically thinking about songwriters who work in the musical theater and are trying to tell stories through music. Pop music has many, many uses, and pop music can be wonderful. Um, it's not my world. My world is trying to use music to tell stories, to support a story and a character and help illuminate that in ways that perhaps words can't do as quickly or as well. Which is you have to be true to yourself. You have to find the thing that fascinates you. You have to find the what it is that you want to express, and then do your best to express it to the best of your ability. And if you're trying to decide what musical to sit down and write, it's a fool's errand to say, well, Hamilton is a big success, so I'm going to try to write something that sounds like Hamilton, because Hamilton may not be your natural.
Right.
I know it's not for me. I loved Hamilton when I saw it, but I thought, I can't write a show like Hamilton. That's not my world. It's probably one of the reasons I loved it, because I know it's not something I can do. I don't feel myself in competition with Hamilton because it's so different from what I do. Um, but you have to think, what can I bring to this story? What is it that I have that makes me the best person to help try to tell this story, rather than will this story help make me a lot of money? And because in the end, it's impossible to guess what people will want 2 years from now. You can only tell the stories that you want to tell, and hope that they will resonate with other people the way they resonate with you.
I can see why Andrew Girl chose you as his husband.
Did we say the same thing?
No, but you have the same kind of mentality that I believe in.
Yes,
So,
we definitely fit together. It was very easy, us coming together. So
and what would you like audiences to take away from your song?
what we would like audiences to take away from our song, I think it's actually sort of very much in what the lyric is, and it was what my brother's first thought that he presented to me, which is that someday things will return back to normal, and and we just have to sort of hold on to our memories of what was good, to see us through to that moment that we'll be able to enjoy all the things that we enjoyed before. We know that it will come back. We know the world will come back. It's just a question of how long that will take. And there's beauty in our memories, even if they make us a little sad to think of the things that we used to take for granted, like going out and getting a cup of coffee in a cafe and watching people along the street, walk along the street. And so we hope that our song is both a little melancholy, but mostly just sort of. Sorry, I'm going all over the place now. There was a kind of song that was very popular during World War II, and it was called the future nostalgia song, or at least that's the name for it that people have come up with in the years since. And I'll Be Seeing You is a great example of that. And there was a great song called The White Cliffs of Dover, and
Oh, yeah.
the lyric was, "There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow when the world is free." And all of these songs basically were nostalgic for something that would eventually happen. And that's what we would like people to say, be nostalgic for the world that comes after COVID, because there will be a world after COVID, and it will be different, maybe a little, but the joys of life still go on, and you have to hold fast.
Well, I thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing what you do next with your
Thank you very
brother
much.
and also by yourself. I look forward to seeing your screenplay.
Okay.
Um, Thank you for talking to us.